It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, though, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, g'day, listeners, and welcome to the Two Jacks, going to Australia and then all the way around the world with all the news and views from myself and Hong Kong Jack, joining us from Hong Kong as per usual. How are you, mate?
Excellent.
Excellent. A little bit of a delay there, mate. I hope you're not going to be swearing, and we seem to have a little bit of a delay, so I can mute you if you do. If you feel the need to burst into just profanity, I'll be able to cut all that out.
Well, how good's your Cantonese? Because I might just do it in Canto. You know?
Yes, I've been a bit of strife there, I must say. I do have access to a Canto translator who swears quite a lot in Cantonese, the wonderful Bruce Venables, and he'd be able to translate for me, but that would take a little while. He does like to swear quite a lot in Cantonese.
There was a T-shirt they sold pellet loads of here a few years ago, which just said "Delay no more." But if you said it quickly with a slight Cantonese twinge, it was a fairly insulting term in Canto.
Bruce Venables will make a speech in Cantonese, and you don't understand the words, but you know it's extremely obscene.
Yeah, he was a copper up here, wasn't he?
He worked with the Hong Kong Royal Constabulary, I think it was called.
Royal Hong Kong Police.
Royal Hong Kong Police, yes. After they'd had a bit of a corruption issue, Jack, found out in the first ICAC, the model of the New South Wales ICAC, where I think they had to get rid of about a third of the Hong Kong police force, and then advertised for anyone around the world. And Bruce was a Tasmanian copper, and he ended up in Hong Kong for a long time. I think he was there for 10 years.
It's a great story, that. We'll make a great movie someday.
He's written about it. He's written about it a fair bit. No doubt if there are any film financiers out here with about 10 million for the movie and sling Bruce $2 million, you can do it.
They had to abandon their idea of prosecuting all the bent coppers because there was just too many of them.
That's it. They just sacked a third of them, and that's how they responded. It was actually probably the smart way of going about it. Get rid of it and rebuild. Now, speaking of which, Jack, a rebuilding of the monarchy, the House of Windsor, has changed hands, and King Charles III has been coronated. Have you heard that verb before, Jack? Coronated?
I hadn't until about a week ago, and I'm not sure it's actually a verb.
It's not
I'm a bit old-fashioned
word.
about this. He was crowned, like they all have been, for 1,000 years.
Coronated is a verb. Well, you can use it in a verb form, and it means someone wearing a crown. Yeah. But it's not the process of coronation. That's a different thing. And, of course, King Charles III had the great crown thrust upon his bonce on Saturday evening our time. I think it was Saturday afternoon. It went on and on and on. I didn't watch it, Jack, because I'm a hardcore Republican. Why would I want to watch that?
Well, I went to a party at my local pub. It's it's a British gastro pub, I suppose you'd call it, and a very diverse crowd there. I was watching it with a Japanese bird, a Nepalese bird, a British Asian, and a few other people. The best comment on the actual crowning, the crowning moment was the only time the crowd went silent. Apart from that, it was just a pretty standard pub party, But as they were putting the crowns on, one of the chaps says, "Oh, look, this is just typical of the patriarchy. The bloke gets the biggest hat."
Well, Camilla's done extremely well to have a hat at all.
Yes.
She was one of the most reviled women in England for many, many years as the other woman in the marriage, but all has been forgiven now, and she is no longer Queen Consort. I'm not quite sure how that works, to be honest. She is the Queen. She is your Queen, Jack.
Yeah, one of the social media mavens explained to Piers Morgan, this makes her a side chick, the world's most successful side chick. And he, like me, said, what is a side chick? And the side chick apparently on social media is the woman who is the third party in a relationship, and she hangs around until the bloke sees sense and comes back to her.
Oh, there you go. So I didn't realise that. I was thinking about handbags, but anyway, we won't hang around there. I did notice one part of the ceremony, and it's not as if I watched this. I just saw this in clips from news services. But there was this rather odd business where they put the shutters up, and then the Archbishop of Canterbury goes with the King. And something happens there, Jack. Something happens at that point. And then the King, in this act of mysticism that would have probably been met with cynicism in the Middle Ages, has become a sort of, closer to God than the rest of us.
I think they anoint him with oil while that situation is. One of the crowd suggested he might have been having a quick slash because they're in the cathedral for a long time.
Better get in a bucket.
Yeah, and my sister was asking me, what would you do? Some of these people are in there for 4 hours, and I said, I reckon they'd be selling out of the deep ends, the adult diapers around the corner.
Well, there's a better way, Jack. And someone with a profound urological experience as mine, you can actually sort of set up a sort of a catheter and strap it to your leg. It means you have to insert the catheter into the tip of your penis and take it all the way to the bladder. But you can sit there happily and shoot out 300 or 400 mil, and no one's any the wiser. So that does happen. There probably were a few with wearing the kit. But yes, he is now our king, and he's better than us, Jack.
Well, he always was.
I've just seen some really funny stuff in the coverage. The ABC copped a bit of a slapping because they took the opportunity. I noticed on Media Watch that Paul Barry was doing the same. Thought it was poor timing that the Republic should be discussed. I did see Adam Spencer speak quite sensibly about it. I guess the view was that this was not the right time. Adam Spencer just made the point that he thought in an egalitarian, it's a great cliche about Australia that we are egalitarian, when clearly we're not, but that in an egalitarian society like Australia's, watching all this sort of foo-for-all about making someone closer to God than the rest of us doesn't really run, and maybe it's time for a republic. But maybe the timing wasn't exactly there.
I didn't have that objection to it. I watched a bit of that because there was the only AFL I get comes on the ABC Asia thinger, and they were doing the coronation, so there was no games on. So I was hanging around the flat on Saturday afternoon. I whacked that on, and it was on in the background, and I just thought it was a bizarre thing to do if you're wanting people to watch the coronation on your TV channel, to spend 2 hours before the coronation starts telling us what a terrible thing the monarchy is, and it's just going to drive your viewers over to 7 and 9, isn't it?
Yeah, look, a mate of mine, Australian-born, the Chinese, actually born in Hong Kong, I should say, but been living in Australia, Australian citizen for a very long time now. He was wanting to watch the Rabbitohs and the Roosters. He's a Roosters man, and he thought Channel 9 should have cut away from the coronation and just play. And now we bring you the Roosters v the Rabbitohs, wherever they played, SFS or wherever it was, and now we bring you that, which would have been lovely. I would have wholeheartedly supported Channel 9 in doing that, but of course they stuck with the coronation, and poor old Bill was left to scream at the television, "Oh no, now the choir's singing," and missing out on his game of NRL. Yeah, but we did see, Jack, it seemed to be prominent Republicans. I am a Republican, by the way, and a prominent Republican, but I had very, very little to say about the process itself because I didn't watch it. If you're a genuine Republican, you wouldn't watch this bloody palaver. But Peter Fitzsimons, he was all over it. He seemed to be just glued to the television.
Yeah, I left the party after a couple of hours and came home and flipped the telly on and sort of had the rest of it on the background. And I hopped on Twitter and just have a look at who was watching it. And who did I find? Peter Fitzsimons,
There
Paul
he
Bongiorno,
was. Yeah,
Mike
had something
Carlton,
to say. He sort of said, "Oh, I've watched a bit of it. I watched
Yeah.
a bit of it."
Jane Caro.
Jane Caro came out as a royalist.
Well, not quite.
Well, a
And
deep
Qui-
admirer of the royals.
Yeah, and Quentin Dempster, he was going nuts. So I thought this was hilarious. The only the only explanation I could find was they were watching it to keep their disgust fresh.
Yeah, look, Quentin did dip into the mystery of the. They put the screens up. He did delve into it. He was anointed with holy oil, according
Yes.
to Quentin, behind the screen, which does sound
Vegan
odd.
holy oil in the case
let's
of
just
this.
say odd. I think it's a good thing that they put the shutters up, so we were spared the embarrassment of where that oil was actually placed on the royal body, where he was anointed. But yes, they seemed, the Republicans, I'm not quite sure, they seem to be closet royalists, a lot of them. They're sitting around, I'm a Republican, you couldn't have, paid me to watch it. And there they all were queuing up and staggered. Don't they look good in their uniforms and all this sort of stuff, Jack? It's probably fair to say, it must be said that the whole, the entire coronation party, the VIPs, etc., and everyone in their finery, probably be banned in Tennessee, Jack. They wouldn't be allowed to perform in public in Tennessee. Too much dressing up.
It could be. No one does the pomp and ceremony quite like the Brits, so I quite enjoyed that. Even my British friends thought the spiritual aspect of it just should be kept quiet.
It's a bit weird. It's a bit weird. And let's face it, the Anglicans, they have no idea what they believe. If you actually sit them down and say, what do you actually believe? Do you believe in the resurrection? Oh, God, that sounds a bit stretch, a bit of a stretch, well, what about the virgin birth, the Immaculate Conception? Oh, no. That sounds a bit of gossip, perhaps something, so they're not entirely sure what they believe in. There's a God somewhere. Is he a good one or a bad one? It's hard to tell. Meanwhile, Jack,
just before we leave
matters.
the best story I saw on it was from a guy called Robert Preston in the Critic. No idea who he is, but I really do like his writing. Here, in what Hugh Edwards described as a rare public appearance, was Prince Andrew, wearing heavy robes under which we must assume he was blessedly free of perspiration.
Yeah, it's a lovely piece, actually. Where was that? There was a Guardian? Oh, it was in the Critic.
It was in the Critic, yes.
In the Critic, yes. I had a good read of it. It was a very good piece and a lovely thing. It's very easy to take the piss out of. I was going to have a crack on Friday, and then I thought, well, the paper's actually invested quite a bit of time. They actually did a special coronation edition on the Sunday. And I thought, well, it's actually not the right time to make fun of the royals, which is a terribly easy thing to do, of course, because let's face it, they're a family of maniacs, and you wouldn't have them in the house.
Well, I kind of like them. I kind of like them because they're a decent soap opera, and unlike the television soap operas, I haven't got to suspend disbelief. They're real.
Well, they are sort of real. I mean, I would have loved to have seen Charles drive off in the car that's fueled by cheese. That's what I wanted to see. But no, they had the carriage, which I think was built in Australia. There was this sort of tenuous. They were always, the commentators, as I understand, were always looking for that tenuous link to Australia. Because, of course, he is the king of Australia. And Camilla is the queen of Australia too.
We can thank Prime Minister Whitlam for that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That all changed, and this is one of the great Sovsit things that the Australia Act was later. That was in '88 in Hawke's time, but we changed the name. It was Commonwealth of Australia, changed to just Australia, and so it was King of Australia, not the King of the Commonwealth of Australia. Is that have I got that right?
Yeah. Well, Gough made Queen Elizabeth the Queen of Australia, not just the
Well, she was
Queen of Great Britain and the United Kingdom.
Yeah, look, I mean, at some point, quite seriously. I mean, we won't have a long discussion about the Republic and where that all stands, but at some point now, it was always said, look, we can't talk about this until Elizabeth II has gone. Well, she has gone now, so maybe now that King Charles III has been coronated, we can have a chat about where Australia wants to be seen, how it wants to see itself in terms of who should be its head of state.
I just say two quick things about that. Firstly, I think Australia remains split three ways: monarchists, direct election Republicans, and minimalist change Republicans. And while that three-way split exists, there's no way forward. And secondly, it really depends upon how Charles goes. His mother was, the late Queen, was a master at managing the separation of the monarchy from the state. His record as Prince of Wales is pretty terrible in that regard. He was always wanting to interfere. If he starts doing that again, the push for Republic will gain momentum.
Yeah, I can't see it, to be honest. I really can't see that happening. But look, the Republican, the Australian Republic movement, just to finalise that, have this hybrid model now, which revolves around the popular election. It's very complicated. A popular election of a president that must also be endorsed by a supermajority of a joint sitting of the Parliament. That's where they are at the moment, with each state making their own recommendations.
It has the worst aspects of both the alternatives.
I've said it. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I just don't know why we don't make Jimmy Barnes president for life and just be done with it. All right, the budget all happening tonight as we record this on the 9th of May, and it is. It will deliver a surplus, Jack. The first surplus since they were saying 15 years, and I presume, therefore, that was a Wayne Swan surplus, 2008, 2007, 8, and he'd only been Treasurer for 6 months, or was it, in fact, Costello's 06, 07?
I don't think Swan ever produced a surplus, is my
Well, they were saying
recollection.
that almost in the same breath. So I presume, therefore, it was the 06, 07 budget. The 07, 08 budget handed down in 07, May of 07, by Peter Costello.
Is Jim Chalmers going to give a vote of thanks first up for all the miners and farmers who've provided the surplus?
Well, there's full employment, Jack, more or less full employment. So that's where he's taking it. Yes, there are sort of they're pushing forward the taxation on the petroleum and gas industries. They're pushing forward those kind of super profits type royalties. So while they were supposed to kick in 3 years' time, now they've been pushed forward. The mining companies, oh, Jesus Christ, they're in a panic and saying, well, commentary about it has been saying, oh, no, now there might not be any exploration. I mean, if you see the profits these companies are making, you've got to say, that's probably not going to happen.
Well, there's a bit of Christine Keeler about this. They would say that. But I just think it's amusing that Jim Chalmers wanting to disinvest, if you like, from these kind of noxious industries like mining and fuel and all that sort of stuff. And they are the exact reason he's going to produce a surplus.
Well, that's fine. But what I'm saying is, we need to tax mining companies properly for the resources, our resources, they extract from the soil or the basis or the base of the ocean.
And we need to invest in them because they're going to provide for our future.
Yeah, you can't just kick it into, giving you a brief surplus before you spend it again. That's the way it should, mining super profits tax should be structured, that it creates a sort of super fund, a la, I believe, Norway, Jack, who now pay for, free tertiary education, have all sorts of benefits to their citizenry that we don't have. Look, we'll know more about where everything stands in terms of surplus. Chalmers has been everywhere in the last week, saying that there'll be some support for people and businesses facing high energy prices in particular. It's likely that there'll be some subsidies available to to either taxpayers or individuals in some way, and to businesses. And
They've announced almost everything.
well, yeah, it's kind of a little bit. I get a little bit annoyed with these premature announcements of the budget, and the treasurers always do it, and there'll be a long line of ministers there too, talking about, oh, we can't tell you what's in the budget, but here's a bit of it. And I get a bit annoyed about that. And I think politically it's a bit fraught, that you really just want to try and keep everything under your hat for as long as you can.
Yeah, good news for you, mate. They're going to allocate $737 million to stop you smoking or vaping.
Well, that's a lot of money, but I'll make good use of it. I promise. I'll have them knocked over. I'll have the durries knocked over by next June if someone gives me $737 million. Yeah, that was all part of the vaping.
And Carlton will be in salary cap problems.
Oh, look, I'll weigh in a few mil to the club. No worry about that. They'll get sorted. This is all part of the vaping ban, Jack, and a public information campaign. I know it's not on our list of things to talk about. I wrote a column about it on Thursday. It's effectively a prohibition on something that is widely already available in Australia, and which there is a profound and intricate black market already in existence. And it's just like you are throwing money away on actually something that is clinically proven in getting people to quit smoking. So it's one of the best tools, not the only one of the best tools of people who are long-term smokers to get off the durries.
Yeah, I can't understand it at all, I've got to say. But,
well, it's nicotine. You're whacking a bit of nicotine in. It's a highly addictive substance, Jack. Let me tell you, it's like heroin, but not nearly as pleasant. And so when you're addicted to it, you can't go cold turkey. It's like if you're an alcoholic and you just say, "Well, I'll just stop drinking one day." It'll basically kill you. The withdrawals will kill you. Nicotine's not quite as bad as that. But you do need to have some sort of nicotine supplement. I mean, people do go cold turkey, but often, more often than not, people who want to quit need a sort of nicotine supplement. So the idea, well, people don't really. I know that people don't get vaping of a certain age group, but it sort of bugged me so much that this was just another form of prohibition when we've learnt so much about the failures of prohibition. Prohibition of alcohol, prohibition of drugs. Now, and I mentioned in the column, it's been 100 years since we banned cocaine in the country. So you'd like to think that you wouldn't see any cocaine around anymore. But not quite working out that way.
Wherever you have investment bankers, you'll have cocaine.
And the rest, cocaine pinches for possession in Sydney are about 3 or 4 times what they were 5 years ago. And that's just simple possession pinches. And, people have just made the wrong decisions, and now they'll go through a court process and have their lives thrown into turmoil from what we might call a moment of indiscretion, Jack.
And are they all still inside the tofu curtain? So they're all in the inner western eastern suburbs? Or?
Oh, no. Mate, you should see the number of pinches in Double Bay. And that's all because of the way the lockdown has worked, and lockdown's gone now, but the cross is dead. So they've just killed the cross. This was a multi-billion-dollar tourist attraction, right? And they just killed it on a whim, really, on a whim, on some bad behaviour from a couple of blokes hitting kids and killing them. And then they just put this lockdown in. So what it created was one entertainment hub in the Rocks, another one in Double Bay, and the other one in Newtown. So that's where the big the big parties are on at any given time.
Well, as you know, when I first moved to Sydney, I used to live in Potts Point, which is just a fancy name for the cross, really.
Yeah, next door to the cross.
And last time I was there, I stayed there in, I think, the last remaining hotel. All the hotels had been turned into apartment blocks.
Yeah, and you talk to someone from Potts Point now, Jack, and they'll say, we don't want the cross back.
Oh, okay.
And it really has just I mean, it's not as if, the strip clubs and the X-rated bookshops and all that sort of stuff are gone. it's the businesses that relied on that tourist trade. You know, the guy used to sell pizzas on the corner there. They're all gone. All the nightclubs pretty much, or they're all well and truly gone. Any sort of support ancillary sort of business around that, high pedestrian traffic, all gone. And it's now you get now you can go and buy a $7 cup of coffee around there.
Yeah.
I think there's only one pub left there now, and it's a
I
shambles.
used to sometimes catch the train into the office from King's Cross Station. So you'd walk along Darlinghurst Road there, and at sort of 8:30 in the morning, and there'd be there was one family I'd see regularly. The dad and the daughter would be dropping the mum off for her day of standing outside a strip club and taking in customers. And it was just a touching family scene as they would, she'd be hoiking up a skirt a little bit and making some adjustments and hopping out of the car. He would give the daughter a kiss goodbye and hop out to go and do her work for a day in the strip club.
Put her through uni without any student loans to worry about. When I first moved up to Sydney, one of my sort of Sunday morning rituals was to get up a bit early, around about 6 or 7, and get down and maybe grab something from McDonald's or somewhere else there for breakfast, and just sit outside the Bourbon and Beefsteak and just watch the punch-ups. And about 6 o'clock in the morning.
It also had that fabulous news agents there that had all the Melbourne papers in it if you wanted them, across the road from the Bourbon and Beefsteak.
Oh, right, yeah. But look, there would always be some drunken idiot who'd walk out of the Bourbon and he'd think, well, I'm far enough away from the bouncers now, so I can give him a bit of lip. And it'd go on and go on and go on, and then the bouncers go, oh, that's enough, I'm going to cross the road. And bang, it was on for young and old. You'd see one every morning. About 6:30, 7, you'd find someone getting thumped outside the Bourbon and Beefsteak.
Yeah. When they decided to renovate the Bourbon, they couldn't find the doors. Because it hadn't been closed for 20 years and no one could remember where the big heavy front doors had been put. They eventually found them in the basement.
There'd be a lot of things stuck under the basement there too, because of course it was run by a CIA operative.
Yeah.
And it was a den of iniquity for many, many years, Very colourful place, just been totally destroyed. There's a movie on now about Ibrahim on Paramount Plus, which I haven't seen, King of the Cross. Well, if you're King of the Cross now, it means you'd probably get $1 off your latte. Meanwhile, Jack, the Victorian Libs, look, they're just gluttons for punishment, aren't they? Speaking of all that sort of sordid red light business, they seem to be heavy on the masochism, don't they?
Yeah. Look, I hate to kick a bloke when he's down, but they are in a fair bit of trouble and they just don't know how to stand up yet at the moment. So,
well, there's a motion to expel Moira Deeming from the party this Friday, so 3 days' time. The word is they have the numbers to do that. This time they didn't last time, and Moira Deeming didn't help herself by threatening to sue her party leader, her parliamentary party leader. Yeah. That's not a good way to make friends, is it, Jack? I'm going to sue you, but I still like you.
That was, if anything, I'm not sure they'll get the numbers, but if they do, it'll be because of that.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I think that's, there are 4 or 5. I mean, let's face it, we're not talking about a Jaya Light team. Well, we probably are in terms of parliamentary membership in the Liberal Party in Victoria. It's not a big group, is what I'm saying. But there are 4 or 5 who are determined to take the party in what they call the right direction, which, as it turns out, is the centre direction. And Moira Deeming is deemed not to be one of those. But that shouldn't exclude her from the party. The fact that she's threatened to sue the Liberal Party and the leader of the Liberal Party, the opposition leader, John Pizzato, is probably good reason enough to send her packing, I'd suggest. We'll see what happens on Friday, Jack. There's bound to be some pain along the way.
Yep.
The Voice, Jack, we haven't had a lot on The Voice. We'd like to keep people informed, but with the coronation, the coronated king Charles III. It's sort of been a second order issue and due to come back. I do notice that the leader, I'm not quite sure of his full title, Warren Mundine, the leader of the No campaign, has been on a bit of a whistle-stop tour. And there's, hasn't been a lot of action on that front just yet.
No.
Well, we'll keep people informed, but if it's just going to be just, the no or yes campaign just going on media tours, then we probably won't spend a lot of time on that. We will try and bring you a broader discussion of the issues that are available and a voice. And Jack is of the belief that the way it's structured, it won't get the support of all Australians or enough Australians to get it through. It needs a majority across the nation, and it can lose as few as 2 states, but a third state would see it knocked over regardless of the national majority. So I'll keep an eye on all of that.
Can you say not just the proposal, but the process, the way it's been gone about? And that's because I think the government is, disinclined or too lazy to do the hard work of going out there and convincing people that it's a good idea.
Well, I don't think it's the government. I mean, look, it is and it isn't the government's job. I mean, it really does depend on the National Council to do a lot of the heavy lifting there. And it does need the support of government. It must be said that the yes and no campaigns, neither of them are publicly funded, although there's some dispute about that. And so really, Albanese can and others, Marcia Langton, etc., can make their arguments, but it is left up, I would think, to a large degree, in people like Noel Pearson, etc., to make the case for the yes vote. I think Noel.
Well, I'm not talking about a campaign. I'm talking about coming up with the right proposal. And the way to do that is to go out and have wide consultation with the whole community, not just 5% of it.
No, fair enough. We'll keep our listeners updated. Now, Jack, Twitter follower Daggy Dad. We probably should get a new handle there, Daggy. But Daggy Dad on Twitter gave me really a bit of a thrashing. He said, "You mentioned that Hong Kong Jack enjoys a May Day holiday." This is in last week's program when we recorded on the 2nd of May. And I said, we don't do it in Australia because I think it's communist. But he was out there reminding us that May Day is a thing in the Northern Territory and Queensland. We do apologise for that. Well, I apologise because I got that quite wrong. I thought there was no May Day celebrations. I mean, there often been union marches and things like that. I understand that, but I didn't know it was a public holiday in Queensland. I just did not know that at all. So silly me. And it's not communism, of course. You don't have to have a day off if you don't want to. But Daggy Dad also asked us if we could explain how modern polling works, how polling is actually done these days. And Jack, have you ever been polled?
Once.
And how did that work?
It was a telephone call. I think I might have been living in Oxford Street at the time. So,
and was there a real person talking to you at one end?
Sorry?
Was there a real person talking to you at one end?
Well, if it was a robot, it was good enough to convince me.
Yeah, because that's the way a lot of modern polling works now. And it's not so much robotic, but you're responding to an electronic recording of a voice. Generally, it's a female voice. And so this is the way polling by phone is conducted these days in what's considered to be the safest way. So there's three considered to be the best or most effective at getting closest to what people are thinking, those poll respondents are actually thinking. So there's different ways. You can do it face-to-face. You can, sidle up to someone with a clipboard in your hand and start asking them questions, and you'll get answers that way. And that would be the most unreliable way to do it, wouldn't it, Jack? And why is that?
Because it depends who's going to talk to you.
Well, it's that, but also the fact that someone who is in a poll on a face-to-face basis tends to tends to respond in a way that they think the person asking the question wants them to answer them, if that makes
most
sense.
people do.
That I don't want to upset this very nice person with a clipboard in their hand, so I'm going to say something that I think that person will want me to say. So face-to-face polling.
Most people do that. I find it irresistible to test their boundaries.
Well, you're going to take the piss, so you're not going to give a real answer either. So face-to-face polling is known as regarded as the least accurate. There is also internet polling now. People might think internet polling is going to be bullshit because they've looked at this sort of Sky News surveys and press button now or dial 11350 and give us a yes or a no. That stuff doesn't really work, but there is very good internet polling, and it relates to getting a group of people that a polling company determines of pretty much open mind, sitting, they're not rusted on in their views around political affiliation, and they'll develop a group that might be about 1,500 strong, and then they'll continue to poll them. So they'll continue to put questions to them like The Voice, but there might be another question about the Republic or indeed the performance of our political leadership, and that group will tend to be reflective, they hope, of what the rest of Australia thinks. So the internet polling can be very good. Most of the phone polling that's done these days is done in a recorded version, usually a female voice, and it's obvious because you'll press 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 when you're prompted to do so, and that takes away that human element. That's the methodology to take away the human element. And responding in a way that you think the polling company might want you to respond. It's still very much sort of more magic than science. All the good pollsters are mathematical and statistical experts, but they still make mistakes. The polling in Australia has been pretty good of late. I know we got a few wrong a few years ago, but it's been pretty good. The things that are always worth being very sceptical about are individual seat polls where the numbers are so low that they just can't be relied upon. And we might remember that from Victoria. There was Dan Andrews' seat where, he was going to lose his seat. We did an exit poll of 200 people, or we polled people before the election or during the pre-polling, and we interviewed 300 people, and it says that Dan Andrews is going to lose his seat. That is just junk, and don't listen to it. So there you go, Daggy Dad.
I would just say whatever the technique they're using, don't look at the raw numbers. The trend is your friend. Look at what the trend says, because if they're using the same technique time and time again, what you want to find is a picture of which way the trend
changes in attitudes, changes in affiliations, that sort of thing. I'm just to finish up on this for Daggy Dad's benefit and for others. We have compulsory voting in this country. So polling, as provided the methodology is right, polling can be a very good and accurate way of determining how, let's say, elections will be voted on. In the United States and the UK, etc., different systems, not mandatory voting, polling can be all over the shop because you just don't know who's going to turn up and vote on any given day. And so you'll see American polling, for example, has a confusion of Democrat registered voters, those likely to vote, those there are various categories, just basically holers bowlers, and knowing that even in the most participated in election in all history in the United States, the 2020 election, you still had a cohort of around about 40 million voters who didn't cast a ballot. Mm. All righty, on to the UK, Jack. There was some, you wouldn't know it. No one really talked about it. Well, some did. because there were some local elections and the Tories got an absolute flogging.
They did.
And Rishi Sunak is said to be a pretty lucky man because the King Charles III was coronated at the same time, meaning that this was shoved off to page 15 of next to the cartoons and the crossword, Jack.
Yeah, I had a look at it. I think the situation, how I would assess the outcome of the local elections is that the Tories did very, very badly. The Lib Dems and Labor did quite well. And the way it looks to me is that the electorate are pretty keen to get rid of the Tory government, but not all that keen to put Labor in. A bit like before the last federal election in Australia.
Yeah. Well, that's how it goes, isn't it? You know, governments lose elections, oppositions don't win them. That's rare, and often those sorts of elections don't provide where a new boss comes in, don't often lead to very good or long periods in government. Look, we did see the results coming in, basically 9-point lead to Labor. That's 35% of vote versus 26 in some of these electorates that went there. It seems like a lot the red wall, which collapsed under Johnson in 2019, has now been rebuilt with a lot of Conservative seats in that area going Labor's way. Jack, it, as you say, it does look like not so much an embrace of Labor, and it looks like we just want you guys out. There's a lot of anger in the UK at the moment. What we didn't see reported during the coronation was the fact that there are some people doing it pretty bloody tough over there. Food prices are through the roof. So just these basic living requirements are falling out of the reach of a lot of Brits.
Food and fuel prices.
Food and energy really causing some problems there. And we're not seeing the same sorts of problems in Germany, in France. I mean, you're seeing hikes in energy prices, but availability of food, Jack, not to mention the price, but just the sheer availability of fresh fruit and vegetables is in the UK is a bit of an issue.
Well, I think that's a problem. That's a problem in France and Germany as well.
Well, not according to the French and Germans, Jack, who delight in sending pics of their greengrocers and their fruitologists through to the Brits, saying, "Oh no, we got lots of tomatoes here. What's the matter with you guys?"
Well, their energy problems in Germany are much worse than the UK's, I can say. And even the German, I was reading Der Welt the other day, even the German papers think that's the case. So there's swings and roundabouts, but all across the continent they're facing.
Well, who's got the higher inflation rate, Jack? Who's got the higher inflation rate? Yeah. Germany or the UK?
The UK, but not by much.
Oh, it's a fair bit, mate. They're in double digits. I mean, so there are profound problems there. CPIH good rose by 12.7% the 12 months to March 2023. It's not good. Inflation is in double digits there. I'll just get the German figure. I should know it off the top of my head, but we may as well satisfy our listeners that we're giving them the right thing. It's about 4 points shy, mate. It's about 4 points shy. Brexit is definitely having an effect, and I'm not suggesting for a moment that all of these things are related to Brexit, but you certainly do have profound consequences around the Ukraine conflict, and particularly in energy prices. But there are supply issues that are causing the Brits, that are causing issues around price hikes in food, in particular for the Brits, that are causing a lot of problems.
Anyway, plenty of time to run on the next UK election. It's 2025, I think.
Well, it can be 2024, late can be 2025.
It won't be early.
Early 2025. Yeah, we'll see how that all pans out. I think they're dead in the water, to be honest. Smell of death around the Tories there. You in the Ukraine, Jack, the much-loved HIMARS, much loved by the Ukrainians, much despised by the Russian army, have been not as effective in recent times due to the Russians' ability to basically block the GPS signals, Jack.
Indeed.
So it's very interesting. HIMARS, of course, is a lovely little video put together by the Russian Defence Ministry to the tune of Exit Sandman, Metallica's hit, showing HIMARS going off left, right and centre. They are a very profoundly useful weapon that GPS locate, and the version that the Ukrainians have from the United States and Germany is designed to hit a target pinpoint from 9 kilometres away to an accuracy of within 1 metre, provided the GPS isn't blocked. And the Russians are doing this in this sort of cat and mouse game that's going on all the time.
Yeah. There's a lot to play out there yet.
Well, we did notice that there have been some preliminary discussions initiated by China, Jack, and the Ukrainians perhaps being more positive about that than ever before. I did see a story too that Putin is developing an exit strategy, acknowledging defeat and would acknowledge defeat and move on. So we may be reaching a little closer to a negotiated settlement than we were perhaps even 2 or 3 months ago.
Yeah, a lot to play out. The bit of news from that area that struck me was from the distinguished British journalist Andrew Neil. He was quoting a source saying that India used to import 1% of its oil from Russia. Now it's 40%. They're the second largest buyer of Russian crude, below world prices. India refines this crude, and what it can't refine, it happily sells back to Europe at a profit.
Money laundering. Sounds like money laundering, Jack.
And Pakistan is moving to do the same thing. So this is sort of undermining the sanctions.
Undermining the sanctions, yeah. I mean, that's been going on for a long time. This form of global or Indian government money laundering. And I can only imagine that they'd be copping a bit of pressure from the United States over that. But, yeah, not good stuff. We also did see that the Wagner Group, we talked about this last week, that the Wagner Group, Prigozhin, the terrible, terrible human being who runs that, was saying that the Wagner Group were going to pull out of Bakhmut if they weren't rearmed, and we thought at the time he might be due to have a little fall injury, Jack, when he said that. Might be a stumble out of a window or something horrible happened to him. But then he has said over the weekend that they have been resupplied, and he has been assured by the Russian Defence Department that they'll be able to keep them in bullets and explodey things for a long period to come. The big effect of this, Jack, is that Russia, and it really doesn't matter in a sense how long this goes on for, Russia will be a pariah state in the world for 10 to 15 years plus as a result of this. So these sanctions, they'll be in place for at least 10 years. And a lot of smart Russian people will be turning around saying, people near Putin, although they're the only people apparently has anywhere near him, and we're talking within 40 metres on the long table, are just yes men. But people should be saying, this is the consequence here. You are driving our economy into misery for a very, very long time.
Yeah, the only qualifier I'd make to that is they'll be a pariah for part of the world, but not all of it.
Well, if you can't access global markets, you're in strife. And if 3/4 of them are saying we won't deal with you. You are sanctioned, and if you set foot on our territory, we'll arrest you. There are going to be some constraints in trade there.
Yeah, well, I think we have to acknowledge that the two biggest countries in the world won't be won't be making them a pariah. China and India won't. I'm pretty confident about
biggest
that.
economy. Well, if you're talking about biggest economies, where are we going? We're going straight to the United States.
I take your point, but you must qualify it by saying there are some significant economies and significant countries who won't be joining in making Russia a pariah.
Well, we know that.
And you can throw in Brazil there as well.
We know that, but what I'm saying is what Russia has got to sell and what it has got to import is going to be minimised by the fact that most of the world treats them as a pariah, and that's the worst impact for Putin and Russia post-Putin, is that economically it will be constrained. Basically, old Cold War stuff, and where did it leave the Soviet economy? All of the constraints that were placed on trade during the Cold War. Yeah, they could trade with China. Yeah, they could trade with
Brazil
Vietnam.
and India.
And they could trade with Cuba, and it just didn't do them any good. And what we're finding now, even more so, is that the only weapons Russia has got that are really effective in a very tired, old, stale military is they can't use. So the major investment has gone into missile technology and nuclear warheads, and they're the things they can't use.
Yeah.
If they used it, Moscow would be turned into a radioactive puddle in about 14 seconds. Electric vehicles, Jack. What are you talking about here? They're beautiful. What's wrong with them? What's wrong with them?
Well, there's always something.
Why haven't you got one? Why haven't you got one?
Well, I haven't got a vehicle at all,
No, you probably shouldn't be talking about car ownership then, Jack.
Yeah.
But electric car owners are losing thousands of years to depreciation. This is in the UK, isn't it?
Yeah.
Early adopters of electric vehicles have seen prices plummet by 39% between 2020 and 2023, whereas your petrol car is holding its value pretty well. The argument I would say, Jack, is that if you buy a car as an investment vehicle, it's not a very smart move. People, you lease these things. It's a service basically, and you're going to lose money overall on the deal unless you buy some sort of collectible thing, and then it might increase its value. But Toyota Corollas, hybrids or otherwise, are not collectible. But here we see, we're basically a lot of the stuff that makes electric vehicles go is the stuff that actually starts depreciating really quickly or brings about that depreciation of the vehicle. So it's the battery itself. That's the problem. So now they're talking about, Jack, in terms of recharging, and you might have seen this, the big recharging stations in the United States where they might have 30 recharging Bowsers and only 4 of them will be available. They're actually talking about swapping batteries. So you'll go into a place, you'll buy or lease or rent a battery, and then you'll take it with you moving forward. That's all going to place a great deal of manufacturing pressure on lithium batteries. But happily, Jack, what do you know about lithium and where it
comes from Australia? How are you going to be able to swap out a 300-pound battery?
Well, they're talking about reducing the size of the batteries. We're not talking about here and now, Jack. I mean, I think you sort of, I know you're a little bit computer illiterate, but I mean, the technology didn't end in 1987, mate. I mean, it still keeps going. So we're looking at, all the time they're looking at reducing the size of batteries as we go, making them more powerful and reducing the size of them. You might remember your first mobile phone would have been the size of a house brick. Good point in case, because that was the size of the battery rather than the stuff that made it call people. So this is the way it will go, and this is one of the suggestions from deGrasse Tyson, for example, that people will just go to a place like a service station and replace their batteries, plug them in and off they go.
Just hook it up to your iPhone. That'll run it, mate.
Yeah, well, there you go. I mean, don't dismiss technology, mate. Not everything just sort of stopped around about 2000, 2005, and you were comfortable with that, and that's no more advances, please. We can get through this stuff. Personally, I think the future of motor vehicles, particularly heavy vehicles, is in hydrogen fuel cells. I think that's where it will go. Follow the Toyota company, because they've been doing hybrids now for 30 years. They're not electric vehicles. They've decided not to go down the electric vehicle path. They are going from leapfrogging hybrids to hydrogen fuel cells. And I did notice a few little problems there, Jack, in California. There's very small take-up of hydrogen vehicles in California, where there are pressures on people to buy renewable stuff. And the price of hydrogen, funnily enough, has gone up. You've got to put about a kilogram of it into your fuel cell, and that can cost you as much as $24, as opposed to about $120 at the Bowser. Now, Jack, in Australia, or there is a concern around the voice about people who identify as Indigenous, and it's actually gone up. Estimates of Aboriginal, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, estimates of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians as at 30th June 2021 were just on 984,000 people, representing 3.8% of the total population, an increase of 23.2% or 185,000 people since the end of June 2016. So
this is reflecting what's happening in the United States, where the Native American population has grown 86% in 10 years between 2010 and 2020.
Now, what's the explanation for this? I mean, I imagine that there are a lot of people saying, those people are falsely claiming Indigenous status in order to get perhaps some tax benefits and what have you. But it's really it's a cultural shift, isn't it?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. That is why I put it on the agenda for today. So I don't think we do know the answer to that.
Well, I'm saying to you that there has been a cultural shift, and that people are less embarrassed to say they are Indigenous, or that
I think that's part of it. Yes,
I think that's a big thing to say. Might I just say, Jack, that as of last Wednesday, I am a grandfather, and a very proud one, and I'm also a grandfather of a little girl a little baby girl who is part Indigenous. Her father, my daughter's partner, has Indigenous blood. And I said to my daughter, I said, make sure you tick that box every single time. Indigenous child, the benefits in childcare alone are worth doing. And it's perfectly legit, And so what I'm suggesting to you is that perhaps 10 years ago, that Indigenous status would not have been acknowledged by some parents anyway. Yeah? I think
that's right. I have a little game I play with a pal. We sometimes watch the ABC panel shows together, and not together, but with our our phones in front of us. And there's invariably an Indigenous person on the panel, and the game is to see who you can pick the Indigenous person first. And sometimes they make it very easy by wearing great big hooped earrings with the Aboriginal flag on them. But when they don't do that, it's a little bit harder. And that's where we're getting now. We're getting to the point where we have people who say, look, I'm Indigenous, I'm a proud whatever woman, and there's no problem. You always know because they're always going to tell you. But without them telling you, you wouldn't know. And I wonder where that takes us in the end.
Well, look, what we've got.
So you'll end
there's
up
a legal definition there's a legal definition for this, and it is, dripping with sort of race issues and all sorts of things. But there is a legal definition. Now, outside of that, the Bureau of Statistics doesn't require people to provide proof, but the legal definition of Indigenous status is a grandparent, and that you are accepted by the community. So I think there's two ways of looking at that. But yeah, that is essentially the legal definition of it.
This is similar to what this
box.
definition came from. It was used in a High Court case. I can't remember the name of the case, but it essentially came from two places. It's a combination of two things. One they use in Canada and one they use in North America. And what I'm suggesting is that the North American experience is this hasn't been all that effective.
Yeah, look, I mean, if you're thinking about people scamming it, I just don't buy it. But I think
but we know there are some people scamming it because they've been caught.
But they'll always will be,
Yes, that's right.
And they're not necessarily a growing list of that number. I probably shouldn't have said that there are particular benefits from being Indigenous in terms of childcare, and my daughter's explained all that to me. And it would reduce their costs in terms of childcare, and go for it. If the government's throwing money away, do it. But I think overall we are looking at a much more pride-driven identification with Indigenous status in this country. So I think that's where the numbers are swelling. Look, someone will always be around to rort it. But there is a legal definition that won't find expression in a census, because people fill out whatever they're going to fill out in a census, and hopefully most people are genuine, but we also know that some people aren't. In the States, Jack, Tallahassee, RDS, is he going to put his hand up finally, Jack?
Yeah, I think he'll put his hand up in the next couple of weeks.
You keep telling me how well he's going, and I keep reading everywhere how badly he's going.
Well, he's in front of Biden in the polls.
Yeah, he's ahead of Biden in the polls in the presidential election, 18 months away. That doesn't mean a whole lot. That's probably just saying we don't want Joe Biden as president, which may well end up be the way it goes. But all of that stuff, he's got so much baggage, it's hard to believe. I mean, he's being sued by Disney World, Jack.
I don't think that's a problem, to be quite honest.
I think it's a huge problem because who attacks Disneyland? It shows such a profound lack of judgment, and that he would do that. A much beloved, and actually Florida's biggest employer. A much beloved institution in the United States. I mean, I just think that just smacks of culture war stuff that he seems obsessed by, and he's not being driven by by the sort of national leadership requirements of him. I actually think, and he spent. Well, we were reported about how badly he went in Europe, where he was described in various business meetings in the UK as being low wattage and looking bored. And then when he got home, he ran around trying to find people to endorse him, and he couldn't, Jack, in Florida.
Yeah, well, he's going really well in the states that are going to decide the presidential election. If he can beat Trump in the Republican nomination, I think he'll be the president. And I think the Democrats are playing a high risk game. They've gone all in on Joe Biden.
Well, it's none of their business, Jack. They can say, well, we want to fight Trump, or we want to fight DeSantis. It's just not their. It's out of their hands.
Yeah, but their only pathway to victory for a Joe Biden victory is if Trump's the nominee, in my view.
Well, let me explain to you what might happen if during a primary for the Republicans, Jack, and a hard-fought primary between RDS and Trump. What do you think is going to happen to the Republican Party? Do you think there'll be, they'll just be able to dust themselves off from that and move on? I mean, there's a very real prospect that party will split and splinter around the primary with DeSantis as this kind of, I think he's Ivy League educated, perhaps traditional Republican in some senses, up against Trump and the MAGA brigade. You know, how's that going? There's no way that ends well for mine.
Yeah, well, my view is that the Democrats are in a lot more trouble than the Republicans right now, because Joe is looking worse by the
incumbency's
day.
everything. Incumbency's everything, and well, incumbency's
only if you're going better
everything.
than that.
And while Biden might not be popular, have you seen his approval ratings lately, Jack? By the way,
36%, the lowest in 80 years.
36% where? I mean,
in the
throw me the
Post.
RCP up, because the RCP up has got him up from 42 to 44.
I think it was the Washington Post this week said he was, and they ranked it as the lowest approval rating for any president in 80 years.
I think he's up just a couple of points, Jack. I'm not sure what that might be a particular poll, but I think if we're looking at polling average, he's not going that badly compared to even Obama in his sort of second term phase, I suppose. Yeah, look, lot of stuff to be run here. But DeSantis, if he becomes obsessed with this culture war stuff, I think Trump will just kick him to death. And really, he's going to. I mean, everyone's. This is the other part of the problem, Jack. He can't get endorsed, or people won't endorse him because if they endorse him, they upset Trump. And that becomes a real problem for him. So it'll be interesting.
There will be a preference cascade when it looks like he's the winner. I don't think he's losing the culture wars. I think, on the contrary, I think the progressive end of the Democrat Party is on the losing end of most of the culture war debates.
Did you see the books that have been banned? Did you see the books that have been banned from schools in Florida, Jack? Have you seen the list of them?
Just let me finish. Have a look at the Washington Post poll this week on the trans issues, and you'll find a majority of Americans, a very clear majority of Americans, this is the Washington Post, I might add, suggests the majority of Americans, a clear majority, support the actions that people like DeSantis have taken. The Democrats are losing that issue very badly.
I presume you're finished now. Have you seen the banned book list in various counties in Florida, Jack?
I have. And I can tell you that just have a look at the poll. They are losing that issue, the Democrats.
Berenstain Bears has been banned from from school libraries. The Berenstain Bears. You remember them when you were a kid, Jack?
Even in New Jersey, a majority
grossly
of parents,
offensive to children, too unsafe. I mean, what it tells you is that these guys are going to play these stupid culture war things to death. But at the core of it is they mistrust children, right? They do not trust children to make good decisions when they become adults. That's what the fear is. This is why people like DeSantis exist in the American political system, because they fear youth. They fear young people coming forward and fighting against them. So they like to keep them dumb. That's the business, right? And all this stuff about trans stuff. I mean, why on earth would we want to discriminate against a group of people who are already heavily discriminated against? I mean, I just don't buy this sort of, it's just a culture war argument. We've just seen it in Australia now too, where you've got drag queen shows being banned because Nazis are making threats of turning up and actuating violence in essentially a group of children, in amongst a group of children. I mean, these things are being directly imported. Well, what do you think the basis of all of this stuff is? I mean, I don't want to get into ESG right now, which is another one of your obsessions. But when we talk about ESG, when I looked at ESG, you just think, you know, the reaction against it is just another dismal culture war battlefield of no moment whatsoever. I mean, you know, if we will talk about ESG later, I assure you, not today. But BlackRock, for example, they fund more coal mines than any other private investment company in the world. So the idea that they've gone green and forgotten how to make money and all this sort of stuff, it really is just culture war stuff. And it bothers me that you get sucked into it every time.
I don't think I'm getting sucked into
Yeah,
anything.
mate, it is a suck-in. I'm telling you. It's
That's your
been
view.
manipulated through news services. It's been manipulated through opinion columns. There's a lot of money from fossil fuel companies that basically spend their time. They don't actually attack the company. They attack the CEO. And there's something a bit wrong about that because the CEO is Jewish, like Soros is Jewish and like Bloomberg is Jewish too. So there's something a bit unpleasant about all of that. But it is driven by people who want you to think a certain way. And that is that big investment companies don't want to don't have all gone green and they're all just throwing money out of a truck. And making things, they're actually blaming BlackRock for the inflation rate in the United States, for the high cost of energy in the United States.
You haven't heard me say
it has
that.
basically no factual basis whatsoever. None.
You haven't heard me say any of this.
Well, you were talking about ESG. You were talking about it last
Yes,
week,
I
Jack.
agree.
I said, you tell me which one of the major 4 banks in Australia with ESG principles around their investments. You tell me which one of them are losing money.
Well, I'm not talking about Australia. I'm talking about a worldwide investment thing, and the companies that are chasing positive ESG investments are doing worse than the companies who aren't.
Or like
the
BlackRock?
investment companies.
Like BlackRock?
The second biggest
BlackRock
company,
is the
BlackRock's
attack.
the biggest. The second biggest company, Vanguard, has abandoned the ESG process.
Well, BlackRock's looking to clarify it, Jack, and the groups that lobby against them have sort of said, "Oh, we've taken $4 billion away from their investment portfolios because the state of Mississippi, the state of Louisiana, the state of I think South Carolina have cut contracts being provided by BlackRock. So they lost $4 billion there. At the same time, BlackRock, from public institutional investment through BlackRock, have raised over $280 billion. I mean, in the end, it's just a nonsense. It's a kind of it's an exploration of the Bud Light boycott all over again. You know, that's just taking it into high finance. It's all a nonsense. BlackRock will try and tell you that they're green when they're not. That's the first thing. That, you know, they're selling their green credentials, but they don't. But they don't really act green. I mean, they know how to make money because they've got a $10 trillion fund. They know
As
how
do
to make
Vanguard
money.
know how to make money, and they've gone a different way, and we'll see how it pans out. Anyway,
Yeah, but it doesn't. I mean, when you say they've gone a different way, what have they done? Have they sacked everybody from their ESG departments? Have they stopped growing vegetables? What have they done?
They have stopped using the what do they call them? The ESG index, where you get an approval index from the ESG funds. They've stopped using those.
I'm not even sure what that means. I mean, you're telling me that they're stopping. What you need to find to prove this is where they stop investing money. And that is why ESG is just complete and utter nonsense. The major investors are not green. They're pretending to be green, and then there's this reaction from fossil fuel, basically pressure groups who say this guy's a Jew and he's trying to Davos the whole world. I mean, that's how unpleasant it is. All right, moving on. Turkey will have this is a huge election coming for the world on 5 days from now. Turkey will elect a new parliament and a new president. And after 20 years in power, the incumbent president, Erdogan, is not the clear favourite. And there's even talk, Jack, he might pull a Trump and say, I don't accept the results of the election. We will see.
Well, this is much more dangerous than anything happened in the United States, I can tell you.
Well, yeah, that's debatable. But, yes, it is huge. And it is just 5 days away. If Erdogan goes badly and polling, etc., and sentiment, the general understanding of sentiment, cannot be discarded just how important the earthquake response was, which was appalling. A lot of Turks very, very angry. A lot of Turkish people very, very angry with the current administration. We'll see how that goes in 5 days, Jack.
Yeah, his opponent has managed to cobble together an alliance from sort of right across the political spectrum. His main opponent, and if he can pull it off, it'll be quite some victory. And whether he can make that stick, if he does pull it off, will be even more interesting.
Yeah, one suspects he's a man who takes bad news very badly, Jack. So we will see. We will see.
He did manage to pull a million people to the old Istanbul airport the other day. I noticed a very, very big crowd indeed. Erdogan.
On that, I think it's the same day, Jack. Thailand will have an election as well. You probably know a little bit more about this than I do. Al Jazeera is reporting that the May 14 election will determine Thailand's political and foreign policy over the next few years. The current leader, under the current leader, Prayuth, Thailand has moved closer to China, abstained on the United Nations resolution condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And opinion polls show the 69-year-old Prime Minister trailing far behind his younger rivals. And it looks like we might have a bit of a shift there, Jack. Heard anything?
Not much. It's a little bit hard to work out what's happening in Thailand until after it's happened.
It's probably a fair summary of things. It's a beautiful country, and it should do better. Is I guess what I'm trying to say. It's also a country that its political leadership must acknowledge the power of the military. Otherwise, there'll be all sorts of trouble. It wasn't so long back they'd have a coup every second Wednesday.
Yeah, we'll just have to wait and see who wins, and then what effect that has on the country,
and how the military accepts it all. Yeah.
Yes.
Meanwhile,
well, that's part of how much effect it'll have on the country.
Yeah, indeed. And of course, it's a constitutional monarchy too, Jack. So it all depends how the king, who's almost godlike, has almost godlike status there. More than the recently coronated King Charles III. Far more.
They do still enforce the rules of lèse-majesté in Thailand.
Meanwhile, Jack, will the people of Chile, will the Chileans make up their bloody minds? Because now they've got a far right have won an emphatic victory in a vote to select the committee that will rewrite its dictatorship-era constitution, which is something all Chileans want. But when they had a constitution put to them by, I guess, a progressive left-dominated group, they rejected it in spades. So now they've elected a far-right group to come on board, take over that committee, and start issuing a new constitution, Jack. So you've got to ask yourself, what on earth's going on over there?
Yeah, well, it seems to swing backwards and forwards all the time.
Yeah, make up your minds. Chile, make up your minds. Make up your minds what you want to do. And South Africa solved all their energy problems, Jack, by just saying, can you please turn everything on?
Yeah, the court has in fact ordered the Minister for Public Enterprises to provide power to public institutions when they're having one of their brownouts, when they're having one of their grid failures.
Well, what's he supposed to do, Jack? Rub a couple of sticks together? What's he supposed to do?
No, that means they're supposed to provide generators.
And
presumably the diesel to run them.
Okay. Well, that's going to be interesting in itself. So the South African High Court has said to the relevant minister, his name is Pravin Gordhan, if there's a brownout, you've got to subsidise certain institutions. I presume
hospitals, etc.
Hospitals, yes, public buildings, etc. Provide adequate care, security, education, so schools and universities as well. The spokesperson for the president said that the ruling was, however, very likely to be appealed. Interesting enough there, Jack. They're saying we're not going to do this. We have significant concerns about the judgment and its impact on the stability of the grid and the negative effect on the fiscus the spokesperson says. The fiscus, Jack. That's an interesting term that he's throwing up there. But that means public spending, doesn't it?
It's how much cash we got hidden behind the couch cushions.
He's actually saying we can't afford all these jennies and the diesel to make them go. Meanwhile, Jack, a bit of good news there. Sri Lanka, we've been following for a long time now, and their terrible trials, economic trials, largely self-inflicted by a really poor leadership that has now been hurled out. 100,000 visitors per month for the last 4 months in Sri Lanka. So that beautiful tourist economy seems to at least be kicking back, and I guess people would be looking at it as one of those great budget locations.
Yeah, they've been getting a fair bit of assistance from two of the big Middle East airlines, Emirates and Qatar, who are running good deals to get there from the Middle East. So good luck to them in Sri Lanka.
And it would be one of those places where budget travellers can go, go and enjoy this beautiful island, some of the most beautiful beaches in the world, trekking, all that sort of ecotourism, and not have to fork out huge amounts of money to do so.
Indeed. You can be up in the hills with a nice 20-degree climate and then back down on the beach in no time at all.
Beautiful place. We must get along, Jack, for when the Australians are having a tour there. It'd be a good time to be in the country, I reckon. Jack, we'll start off with the Premier League this week. Man City are on top of the ladder with a game in hand. They look to have, Arsenal seem to have, they're still in it, but it's not likely. Basically, they now have to wait for Man City to fall over, which doesn't look very likely because Man City are in the Champions League and also the FA Cup. They could easily pull the trifecta this year, Jack.
Yeah, it gets a little bit harder now for Man City in this sense, is that they've got some tough away games coming up, and at the same time they're playing Champions League and an FA Cup final.
FA Cup,
So
the trifecta's there for them, and they're good enough.
Yeah.
They are good enough. They are a brilliant side.
It just gets hard to pull all three off at the one time, that's all.
It does, yeah. And Arsenal are desperately unlucky to be kicked out of the Europa Championship, which leads into the Champions. Desperately unlucky to lose that in a penalty kick-off. And you'd say they probably haven't had a bad season to finish second, but in the end they'll have no silverware for it if it pans out that way.
If you'd told them they'd go this well at the start of the year, they'd have taken it.
I think that's true. And I was talking to, my very good mate Bill about that. He's an Arsenal man, and he said, look, I was really pleased that we got kicked out of the Europa stuff because I just thought that, it'd be a distraction and all this, so we can concentrate on the Premier League. But look, Man City are a very good side. They've been hunting sides down for a long time, and they look like they've got enough lead in the pencil to keep them going. Celtic won the Scottish Premier League, Jack. Ange Postecoglou now is almost a god in Glasgow. In parts of Glasgow, not all of it perhaps, but he's done a fantastic job there, hasn't he?
Yep. They were going pretty poorly when he arrived, and he has made them once again the powerhouse of Scottish football.
2 titles.
He has won almost everywhere he has gone, Ange.
He must be on the list of a number of Premier League clubs to come along and join them. I'm sure his phone's been ringing.
Yeah,
already.
It should be. I mean, I think he still holds the record for any national sporting comp in Australia with Brisbane Roar with 36 wins in a row. He won a couple of titles with Fukushima, the Mariners.
Not Fukushima, mate. Don't play soccer there, can't. Not for 50,000 years.
In Japan, and now he's done the same thing in Scotland. So he's clearly got the goods.
No, I think he's terrific, and I saw him interviewed after the game. Did you see the game actually, Jack? There was a lovely little chant sprang out from their last game.
I did say that. Yeah.
Did you see that? You can shove your coronation up your ass. So not everyone is pleased to see King Charles III coronated. Ugly scenes, Jack, on the weekend. Collingwood Footy Club. It was the first time they played Sydney, I think, for about 12 years.
Yep.
In Melbourne.
At the MCG, yes.
At the MCG, yeah. They may well have played them at Marvel, but at the G, it's the first time in a long time. It used to be that Collingwood give up a home game and go and play up at Olympic Park, of course, and host the Swans there. That was one of those sort of
They did.
things there. Anyway, we've seen Collingwood beautifully coached. I think they've got a great leader in Darcy Moore, spoke beautifully at the end of the Anzac Day game. Clash between Essendon. So they just actually spoke beautifully. Looks like a terrific young bloke. So they're a good club, well led on and off the field. And then we get the Collingwood supporters, Jack, and booing Buddy Franklin, who's been playing in the AFL. I just want to say, so 19 years he's been in the AFL, and an absolute legend of the game. So what is going on there, Jack?
Oh, no idea. You'd have to be there to know that.
Well, Michael O'Loughlin suggested, who was at the game, suggested that it wasn't just a bit of melodramatic response, that it was a bit of racism a la Adam Goods, and I hope that's not the case. He certainly believed that it was. Other people were talking that down. The AFL issued a statement. Collingwood apologised. So the club is in good shape. It's in good hands, good coach, good captain, good on-field stuff. And you'd just like to think the next time, well, Buddy I think will play, if he's available, will play, I think, round 17 against Richmond at the G. That may well be his last game at the MCG. And I'd suggest that people should be applauding rather than booing him, Jack.
Yeah, I'm not much for one for booing players at the game.
Oh, it's boorish anyway, isn't it? It's just a boorish way to behave. I did watch the game, and Collingwood were too good. It looked to be a good and even first half, but Collingwood looked to be too strong in the second half and blew Sydney away where they shine in the last quarter. And I did notice there was a bit of a low boo early on, and then it just got worse throughout the game. So, not expecting a lot from Collingwood supporters, Jack, but they can lift their game a little bit here, get some dental work done, try and be like normal people. NRL, Jack, I don't know how
I can remember having an argument with I was out at Windy Hill once with a great Carlton mate, and we were in the Essendon members, and they were booing Terry Downer, who was having a dirty day. It wasn't one of TD's best. And they were getting stuck. This is the Essendon crowd getting stuck into Terry Downer. And my Carlton mate said, "Look, I'm a Carlton man, but you can't do this. This man's the legend of your club, He got into 2 premierships. He's a great player. You don't be booing."
Yeah, who's booing Terry Danaher? I'm like booing Neil Danaher, I mean, just a star as a coach and a human being and a player, of course. Pretty decent cricketer, Jack, 100 against us as well in the schoolboy stuff. Like to knock it around a bit. NRL is just one of these competitions. Unlike the AFL, Jack, I just tried to make this point last week, where the AFL seems to have almost structural issues now, where there's always 2 sides on the bottom that are pretty much easy to beat for anybody else, and then you've got a sort of top 4 that really don't get beaten very often by sides below them. In the NRL, anyone can win on any given day, and the Roosters have a win, then have a loss. Parramatta will pop up and have a win. The Raiders couldn't buy a win early on. Now they can't stop winning. It's a very, very even competition, and who knows how it's going to go. I mean, Penrith last week were beaten by the cellar dwellers in West Tigers, and you might say they're easy beats, but they popped up and beat last year's premiers. It's a sign of a very healthy competition, Jack, and perhaps something the AFL would love to see in that code.
Yeah, I think the difficulties of the AFL is that clubs just get themselves into a little bit of a pickle with their list management, etc., and find that they've got to almost shut it down and start again.
And it's timing. And if you get that timing wrong on the list management, on that time to basically clear out a few players who've been around for a while, then if you don't do it, and West Coast Eagles a pretty good example, they probably should have done it around their premiership, not long after their premiership. They should have moved a few blokes on, try and trade, and concentrate on draft where they're just bringing good young players in. Otherwise, it's a long time. They will be cellar dwellers for a fair while, I think, the Eagles, because they did delay their rebuild. Meanwhile, Jack, just a bit of a taste of the cricket. Marnus Labuschagne in excellent nick, and one of his teammates, I think he's playing for Glamorgan, suggested look out England. Marnus is in very good nick.
As is his teammate Michael Nessa, another hat-trick the other day. So.
Oh, sure, took the hat-trick, very happy boy too, and looked like he was doing a fair bit with it too, on what a traditionally sort of greenish wickets this time of year, early May.
Well, the third bloke in the hat-trick helped him out by shouldering arms to a lovely in-swinger.
Fair distance, Jack. He actually the ball pitched about probably a sixth or seventh stump and then just took the top of off. So it wasn't a bad nut. I think you're entitled to go, that's not going to hit the stumps, but it actually did. He's a great bowler, isn't he? And just having
he's not in the squad, I don't think, is he?
Oh God, he can't be far away. That's a good question. I don't think he is, because they took one of the younger WA quicks.
Anyway, he's over there if they need him. He's over there if
required, and just a wholehearted cricketer. Marnus Labuschagne in good nick, as I say. Smith, I think, had his first innings. He's playing 7, and I think it's Sussex, but I could be wrong. And he's also batting a bit with Pujara, who's been making runs for fun in the county competition, Jack.
Smith, I tell you what, if you were a captain the other side, you'd be talking to your bowlers, and Smith at one end and Pujara at the other. So just do your best, fellas.
Just do your best and do the old Keith Miller thing with the field. Just spread out, guys, and do your best, because once this bloke gets in, it's going to be very hard to get him out.
We're bowling for a run out here,
Yeah, exactly right. Pujara, one of the great concentrators, one of the great walls of cricket, like his predecessor Rahul Dravid. And that takes us out, unless you've got something weird and wonderful for us, Jack.
I do. There are some really odd things about Twitter, but there's some things that I really like about it. This was an American fellow on the coronation. I'm fairly uninterested in the British royals, but find Charles III a poignant figure, because he's basically one of those 70-year-old guys you see on the telly driving the Ferrari he wanted his whole life but can only now afford, grimly realising he's grown too old to really enjoy it.
And that Ferrari, Jack, is fuelled by cheese.
Fueled by carrots or something.
He's got the Aston Martin. And they've converted it in, they use the old produce, the cut-off cheese and stuff like that, and that's how they get the Aston Martin going. He loves it.
Do you remember Richard Hines? He used to be on the telly all the time, the journo?
Yeah.
I do follow him on Twitter, because he's often amusing.
He is quite funny for a Collingwood man.
And he is very much a Collingwood man. He had a bit to say on the booing. He was there, but it's worth having a look for that. And this on the coronation, and his comment was, "No late change for the coronation. William is the sub." And Martin Pakula, the former Victorian minister,
Martin,
who obviously follows Richard Hines as well, man. He jumped in and said, "George, Louis, and Charlotte, the travelling emergencies." And Richard came back on and said, "Yes, Megan has been managed."
She has been, and Andrew to be considered when available. Possibly not even that. Not to be considered. A
chap called Ken McAlpine jumped in. Andrew failed to make the squad after a disappointing season so far, being largely unsighted and hasn't raised a sweat.
Some rose to sweat. Yes, we get that in again.
Someone else came in and said Megan is out with general soreness.
Very, very nice. What a great way to finish the program. We started with King Charles III being coronated, and we ended that way as well. Huge week. If my understanding of the longevity of the royals is anything to go by, we're looking at we might have a coronation reasonably soon, within a decade or so. If we're looking at sort of Edward VII following Queen Victoria's very, very long reign. So he'll be around for a while with his cheese-driven car, and good luck to him. Thank you for your time today, Jack. Go and study the ESG and have a look at it. I think you're being bluffed. I think you're honestly being bluffed. Go and have a look at it. We will talk about that next week.
I've already got the phone on. I'm booking in for re-education camp.
Well, you might have to be shipped off for re-education at any given time. Let me just tell you, but we will do the ESG because it's up. I've got to tell you, it's a fight over nothing that really just doesn't exist.
Yeah, I know. Okay, you've
I don't know. All right, okay, we'll move on from that.
I'll be swilling out pigs out in the west of China somewhere, from my troubles.
But you'll have a better view of the world. That's important. You'll have a better view of the world by then. We just want to thank our listeners for joining us. Even while we have a bit of a barney, we do actually get on very, very well. But that's what good podcasting is all about, where we do a little bit of a stick every now and then. And if we don't look like having one, I'll always start one. We just wanted to let our listeners know this is how we roll. And we also say, if you want to drop us a line and let us know anything you like about the show, anything you'd like us to discuss, any comment that you want to make, please drop us a line. You can get hold of me on Twitter, Jack the Insider. My DMs are always open. And Jack?
HongKongJack.substack.com.
He'll be just hammering out the ESG stuff during the week too, so keep an eye out for that. Thanks, listeners, and we'll see you later on next week, in fact.